Very good. Okay.
Well, you remember, I'm sure, that right after 9/11, George W. Bush made a speech in which he had a kind of a plaintive plea. He asked, why do they hate us? And his answer was, they hate our freedom, our initiative, and all the wonderful things about our society. Well, actually, he shortly after that, the Pentagon organized a study by the Defense Science Board to answer the question of why do they hate us, responding to Bush.
Right.
And they said, it's not that they hate our freedom, it's that we hate their freedom. They hate our policies. They don't hate us. They hate the policies that we've been carrying out. He went through them. The Wall Street Journal, to its credit, did a poll right at about the same time of Muslims, but only the kind that they were interested in, the ones with bankers, professionals, people embedded in the U.S. International global economic system and so on. And they investigated their attitudes about the United States. And of course, they're not opposed to the neoliberal system. They're part of it. They're not opposed to the capitalist imperial structure. They're part of it. What they said is that they're opposed to two things primarily. One, the sanctions against Iraq, which had killed hundreds of thousands of people and just devastated the society.
Right.
We're so close to genocidal that the two international diplomats respected diplomats who presided over the awful food program, Dennis Halliday and Hans von Sponeck, they actually both resigned in protest because they said they're violating the genocide conventions. And the other thing was the treatment of the Palestinians, the U.S. support for Israeli oppression of the Palestinians.
Wow.
So that's why they didn't hate us, but that's what they're opposed to.
That's what they're opposed to.
And in fact, Bush wasn't the first president to ask, why do they hate us? What the press should have reported is that Dwight Eisenhower, when he was president, asked the same question. He asked his, it's all declassified years ago, he asked his staff, why is there a campaign of hatred against us among the Arab people? Not the governments, they're fine, but the people, why is there a campaign of hatred against us? And right at the same time, the National Security Council, the main planning body, it came out with a study about this. Again, long declassified. And what it concluded is that, it's almost quoting, they said there's a perception in the Arab world that the United States supports dictatorships and repression and blocks democracy and development, and that we do it because we want to gain control of their oil supplies. And it went on to say that the perception is more or less accurate, and furthermore, that's what we ought to be doing. Now, going back to the Wall Street Journal, 2001 survey of moneyed Muslims, as they called them, they repeated that too. They said, problem is, apart from the particular cases that I mentioned, the U.S. supports dictatorships, harsh, brutal repression, blocks democracy and development. Now we do it because we want to maintain control of their resources.
Now this happened under Eisenhower. It was under his clock that we invaded Iran and overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh.
Yeah, but that wasn't one of the issues that the national.
That wasn't.
That was that's just one of it. Yes, we support dictatorship in Iran, but everywhere else too.
You know, I want to cover a lot of elementary truths that'll keep the people going, and there's some that we've talked about in the past. You said Afghanistan, and that Afghanistan women had a right to vote before women in the United States?
About the same time, maybe a year or two before.
Wow. What happened from there?
It was in the early 1920s. I forgot the exact date, but
Right.
early 1920s.
Wow, that's just, it's remarkable that something like that could be...
Well, we went a long time after the Declaration of Independence before women were regarded as authentic people.
Right, right.
And in fact, women's rights are still an issue of a struggle. It was since the 70s and the 80s that there was a great expansion of women's rights.
It seems like since I saw you last, the Occupy movement started, and now they seem to be coming down on that. And not only that, but the thing that scares me is, as we talk today, I don't believe that it's been signed or vetoed yet, is Senate Bill 1867, the way it stands now, which would say basically that they can take anybody, anytime, for no reason and hold them indefinitely. Now, Obama said he'd veto it, but I'm not sure if he's going to veto it.
Well, actually, that's the way it came across at first. And it did elicit a lot of discussion, internet and other discussion. However, the Senate watered it down.
But not much, but they can still do that technically, because they said
technically they could always have done it.
Right.
But so what it effectively did, it appears, so far, where it stands now, is it sort of reinforces existing law, which is pretty awful.
The Patriot Act.
Basically, Patriot Act and other legislation which implements it.
So you don't think they'll come, if this law passes, because I see that people are getting frightened already, and they ought to be frightened of the law, not frightened to stand up to it.
I keep a close eye on it, because it looks as if right now that the senators who initiated it have backed off and have said that it will not change existing law. But existing law is bad enough. Existing law does permit indefinite, permanent detention of so far non-citizens, but not much. Obama's already authorized murder of American citizens, so detention of them would be much farther.
Right.
However, I think focusing on this particular law is a little misleading. It's the existing body of law and practice that's the real danger. And this is maybe moving it a little bit farther, but not much.
Yeah, it is a step in that direction. It's scary. I mean, didn't Eisenhower, you mentioned before, I mean, it is farewell address to the nation. He said, in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of power, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. Now, we have half of our spending going toward the military, and here we are having to cut back, and all that money's being spent. And, we certainly don't seem to be heeding his words.
It's expanding, in fact.
Yeah.
Obama just is now sending Marines to Australia. The U.S.
They want to
is
set a
building
base up there?
So
down
we
there.
have quite a few bases in Australia. This would be a new one, obviously aimed at China. They're building a base in South Korea, Jeju Island. There's big protests about that on the island, but looks like the United States and South Korea will build a major naval base there, also aimed at China. And this is building up for a potential conflict, which is...
Now, Russia and China aren't too happy with us.
Oh, no.
With the way, and maybe that balance of power is what's needed. We interrupt this broadcast. Moving right along. The Occupy movement. It's supposedly the one part of it I don't like is that the 1%. I think that 1% that we've talked about this, it really should be subdivided into like 1/10 of 1%. But other than that, it's an interesting time right now. It seems like they're trying to they're trying to put more pressure on their end, and the people are trying to put more pressure on, like last time we talked and I said dissent was high. I said, no, not dissent, frustration. Well, now it's dissent. It has led to that next step of the Occupy.
We talked was before this.
Right before.
Yeah.
It must have,
This is a pretty remarkable development. I mean, it's too late, I think, but great that it's happening. It's the first major popular reaction to over a generation, over 30 years of really a pretty violent attack on the population.
Yeah.
You take a look at what's happened in the last 30 years. It's a bitter class war. the economy shifted pretty dramatically towards finance and deindustrialization, offshoring of production. The effects were numerous. One was the very high concentration of wealth. As you say, it's the top 1/10 of 1% is wildly overweighting the distribution. And for the rest of the population, you know, the 99%, it's symbolically for the large majority, it's stagnation or decline.
It's crazy. I heard on the radio on the way up here that they said 1 out of 4 children is hungry in the United States.
Yeah, it's a very severe period. Unemployment, real unemployment, is essentially at depression levels. And there's a difference. During the Depression, which I'm old enough to remember, unemployed working people, most of my family in fact, had a realistic expectation, at least after the mid-30s, that things would get better. There are things you can do about it. The CIO was organizing, the WPA was functioning, there was a general hopefulness. Things will come back, we'll get over this, we'll work together and get over it. It's not true now.
No, it's not
if
true.
If things are on their present course, those jobs are not coming back.
I don't see how they can get them back. They got us involved in these trade agreements, and
they can get them back, but they don't.
Well, they could, but not with the way that if you still have puppets, like for instance Levin, who co-sponsored, or I think he may have even written it up, and McCain. Well, anyway, he and McCain were in on this, throwing in this amendment along with the National Defense Authorization Act. And but Levin is I interviewed somebody in Michigan who was running against him for Senate in 2002, and I mean he's everybody donates to him. He had hogged all the corporate money, and I mean he's owned. And for these business people to be making decisions like this, and now Newt Gingrich is going to go ahead and ask Donald Trump. I was glad that even Fox TV was mocking them. I mean, even the next two people, they were merciless. I was surprised. Now, this was 5 in the morning. Maybe there's a little different as 5 in the morning. Like when I was introduced to you in Manufacturing Consent, Noam Chomsky in the media, it was in the middle of the night. You know, sometimes they do give you a bit of the truth. They throw it out there, and then but they don't leave it up for very long. And,
mocking Gingrich for saying we'll bring in businessmen is a kind of a joke. Who doesn't?
Exactly. Well, he made it sound like he was being unique in so doing, or no, that his party was unique in so doing, and that's not true. Both parties.
Take a look at Obama's economic team. It's all people from the Rubin gang, coming straight out of the financial sector. Not just
the ones who were responsible for a lot of the troubles we're in now, right? I
mean, they basically the guys who brought about the crisis were called in to put band-aids on it, and not too surprisingly, the proposals that they came up with greatly benefited the big banks and investment firms who were responsible for the crisis, and the rest of the population was left to fly in the wind. Right. Actually, the original TARP legislation, if you look at it, was a bargain. It was going to be the legislation calls for bailing out the banks, but also giving relief for the victims of subprime mortgages, foreclosures, and so on. They were supposed to be compensated and supported. Well, only the first half of that legislation was ever implemented. Yeah. Actually, the Inspector General of who's in charge of it wrote about it later very angrily. So it was, the bailout is only a small part of it. Less talked about is the huge amount, probably trillions of dollars of cheap loans, which are basically gifts to the Goldman Sachs and others. Like if somebody lends. If you can take out a loan at some very low interest rate, and you can turn that money into Treasury securities where you get a higher interest rate, you can get quite rich. It doesn't take a genius to do it, and that's essentially the way it was done.
Now, getting back to the job situation, and just the inefficiency of the country, the cannabis issue, again, has been, actually even the governor of New Jersey the other day was saying that the drug war had failed. I mean, this is an inefficiency we cannot afford. Like, I brought this up before, we have over 800,000 arrests for possession of a plant every year. And meanwhile, like, some 800,000 kids go missing. Well, obviously, our resources are being wasted, chasing people for, basically the propaganda of Harry Anslinger, which is really where it all originated from. That's just an inefficiency and really a horrible thing. I mean, people thrown in cages. It's not, I was in the healing arts. It doesn't make sense to me that we would harm innocent people for what they do. Is that the land of liberty? That's...
Well, this is the same 30 plus years. The incarceration rate in the United States in 1980 was roughly the same as other industrial countries, slightly toward the high end, but within the spectrum. Since then, it's just shot up. Every president is now 5 to 10 times as high, and it's mostly victimless crimes.
It's crazy.
And it's also very, it's established what some call a new Jim Crow. It's targeting African Americans, Hispanics, mostly males. And it's sort of, it's essentially reconstituting something like the imprisonment system for African Americans that was instituted after the Civil War. After the Civil War, there were about 10 years of relative freedom, and then there was a North-South Compact, which effectively allowed the South to criminalize black life and put the population back into jail. That's where they went. They became another slave labor force. That went on until the Second World War.
Well, what do you think? I mean, here we have this Occupy movement. I would like to see, I know we don't agree with Ron Paul on every issue, but my goodness, as far as foreign policy, I mean, he even discussed that we invaded Iran in 1953. He's talked about the foundations as to why they're mad at us, and he was booed off the stage. And I'm worried that last time Fox took him off. Fox took him out of the debates. Now I heard some other, I forget what Israeli word is, somebody who wanted to take him out of a debate and said he had nothing to offer. And so you still have this censorship. I mean, he's been doing well in the straw poll. I mean, and he really. I hope that, I've actually had people write me and say, we're worried that he maybe shouldn't take any small craft or anything, and you just, in other words, they're worried for his life as far as him really pushing the line like this. And I don't think that should be the case. There should be somebody that would pop up right after him if enough people were saying the same thing.
Well, as I said, the Pentagon said the same thing. They said they hate us because they hate our policies.
I mean, somebody running for president. I mean,
actually, there's a big flap right now about an American ambassador in Belgium who pointed out what every specialist on the region knows, every reader of the newspapers ought to know, that he talked about Israel's increasing isolation.
Yeah.
And he said it's a result of the kind of policies they're following. That's going to lead to isolation. It'll lead to anger at Israel. It's not anti-Semitism, but it'll be called anti-Semitism.
That's what they do.
He came under huge attack. The Obama administration is now under congressional pressure to withdraw him for daring to say what's a truism, international relations truism.
Wow. So, I mean, we could deal with...
even Panetta came under attack when he deplored Israel's increasing isolation, which is of course the case, but you can't say it.
It's just
there's a catechism that you have to keep.
Well, I hope that some of these things, like we've talked about before, even the leading statement or the introduction statement, which is a quote by Youre, that we live entangled in webs of endless deceit in a highly indoctrinated society where elementary truths are easily buried. These are our truths. And it's funny about this said in 1867. The media had buried that story. And it seemed to be unearthed by the Obama administration. They're the ones that said, well, we might veto this, and then it kind of came out more that it was even there.
And there was also a good deal of popular protest. I don't know how much.
Oh yeah, that had a factor too. But as far as the media not being able to ignore it, I mean, when the president does something, when he says something, they can't ignore it as easily. So that's why if somebody who, like Ron Paul, were to get in there, people who are supporters of his, like I mentioned, well, I mean, come on, he wants to stop foreign aid. We need to, I mean, kids are starving or dying of preventable causes at the rate of 1,000 an hour, at least, and they're just discarded every day. We can't really, I mean, if we were to cut into the military budget instead of spending more than the rest of the world combined, we'd have enough money to save some of these children. And if we legalized marijuana, that would do away with some of our inefficiency here. The hemp it could be used for so many products. I live in an area that used to be big into textiles, and it's just one closed plant after another because all that went overseas. However, that land there, even my doctor said he's looked into it, and it's perfect for hemp, and that could add so much. So I mean, here we are. We're at this tipping point. That's what Edgar Mitchell said. We're at a tipping point, and it's not clear which way it's going to go. But we are the ones who are going to determine which way it's going to go, and it's up to us. And that's how we did it to the audience when I was talking.
Well,
we're really
the exciting aspect of the Occupy movement. It's becoming a kind of what could be a cutting edge of mass popular action, which would shift the direction in which the country is going. And there's not a lot of time to do it.
There's not a lot of time to do it.
There are issues that are not discussed, barely even mentioned in the press, which are some of the most important issues in history. For example, in the last month, the U.S. Department of Energy came out with its report on emissions for 2010, the last year that they have data on emissions. Spectacular rise, the largest ever. In fact, the level of emissions is now worse than the worst case scenario estimated by the International Commission, the IPCC, International Commission of Scientists. They gave a range of possible scenarios, some very alarmist, some mild. This is worse than the most alarmist. That's just the beginning. A couple of days later, the International Energy Association, which is not a radical body, that was formed on the initiative of Henry Kissinger, all the oil companies are in it and so on. They came out with their estimate, and their conclusion was that in 5 years at the current rate, it may be irreversible. So we're coming to the point, they said, where within 5 years the global emissions, which of course are substantially human created, will reach the danger point that's been set, 2 degrees centigrade rise in temperature. That may be the irreversible point. We may reach it in 5 years.
Right.
That's pretty serious.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the huge effort made to increase use of fossil fuels. I mean, when you read about it, they tell you that China's the main villain, and technically their emissions are slightly above ours by now. But
they also have, 3 or 4 times the population?
Well, it's much more than that. But so per capita it's much less. But there's another point that's barely discussed. The emissions in China are basically coming from, much of it, we don't know how much, is coming from Western investment. So when Apple produces your iPhone and Foxconn under hideous working conditions, those are called Chinese emissions, but it's U.S. investment. And in fact, China is pretty much an assembly plant for the advanced industrial countries. The ones on its periphery, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, they have a positive trade balance with China because they're providing the parts and the components, the advanced technology that's being assembled in China. We're doing it too. Dell, Apple, Motorola, any number of companies are producing in China. And those are called Chinese emissions, but it's U.S. investments. Same with Europe.
Wow.
So if you did a real analysis of this, an honest analysis, it would look quite different. The developed countries are far more responsible for the destructive emissions, which may be the end of viable existence.
We don't know. I mean, well, that's the thing. As far as this, those emails and that, as far as, there's a lot of people who are trying to refute that it's even happening. I mean, the Earth's warming. They're saying, okay, it's warming. We know this, but it's not caused by humans, and it's just. I mean, some of these people are going to watch this video,
like,
so
it's kind of like believing in a flat Earth.
Yeah.
And it's not just, if there's some people doing it, okay, who cares? But what's really significant is that a couple of years ago, the energy-intensive industries and the big business lobbies like the Chamber of Commerce quite openly announced that they're initiating a major propaganda campaign to try to convince people that this is not a problem, and and that's had an effect. You take a look at polls. Actually, just another thing that happened last month is that an international polls came out asking people all over the world about their attitudes on these things. Well, almost everywhere people want much more action on the part of their governments to do something about it, even in the United States. But the United States is much substantially lower in concern than other countries. And the disbelief in the overwhelming scientific consensus is, disbelief is considerably higher in the United States than elsewhere. That's a consequence of the massive business propaganda campaigns.
Wow.
So, some individuals say it, well, okay, who cares? But when the major business lobbies and the major energy industries are doing it, that's serious. That's hard to get out of.
Exactly. Bev sent something.
And I should mention, when the media discuss this, they present what they call balance. So on one side are, overwhelming majority of scientists. On the other side are a couple of skeptics. And missing entirely are the much larger group of scientists who do dissent from the consensus because they think it's not alarmist enough. For example, right here at MIT, there's a climate study group, scientists, public policy people, very sophisticated people. Their analyses are far more alarmist than the international consensus.
Wow.
But they're not part of the debate, and many others like them. There are lots of them.
Well, this thing that Bev posted, I didn't even get to see it, but they told me about it on the way. I guess some young adolescent girl got to speak to the UN and said, you're messing up our world. I mean, if I'm going to have kids and this is our world that you're messing up here. They're putting profit over people, and so out of the, here's just this young person who understands more, and people are just, they're so busy. They write me sometimes, they go, Ken, I understand this and stuff, but I'm so busy just trying to make ends meet. And a lot of what they're busy with too are games. On Facebook, there's all these games. They have all these distractions, plus television has so many distractions. And I think that's having a part of it.
We're actually playing a game now with the decent survival of our grandchildren.
Yeah, the real game.
Yeah.
The real game.
And it's amazing the way it's kind of like lemmings walking off a cliff.
Exactly. Well, I'm hoping that we can steer the lemmings away, and I'm hoping that the Occupy movement gets a little bit involved in elections. I don't know, I bought a site. I used to always think if I had the right website, I don't know, but I had occupyelections.us, which I might do something with, but I really think that people need to be behind and know that they've been censoring our elections. That's what I've been documenting since 2000. I hope they don't do it again with Paul. What is your...
Well, he doesn't have a chance of doing it.
You think they'll...
He doesn't have any business for it.
But he has a
You
lot
can't
of,
participate.
I mean, he's been doing well in the straw polls
Yeah,
and
but
whatnot.
that's irrelevant. If you want to run an American elections are bought.
So far, but we could, if we're gonna change,
You could change it, but you need a really mass movement.
that's what I'm trying to hope the Occupy movement would.
Well, it's nowhere near the scale where it could. I mean, I have pros too, but if you think about electoral impact, it's far from being able to get involved in a $3 billion election.
But if people understood what we're talking about today,
They could.
they could.
Yeah.
We could, if enough of us put forth the effort, and you're saying that we really probably should keep on keeping on, even if he signs this bill. Those of us who've been speaking out should keep on keeping on, right?
Yeah, but that's undoubtedly true, and it has an impact. But if you want to be serious about elections, a couple of things you have to bear in mind. For one thing, even if you could elect your own president, pick your favorite state, elect him president.
Fine. You got to worry about Congress.
Wouldn't make any difference.
Well,
because you need senators, you need representatives, you need governors, you need the investors. You have to have control over investment decisions, over what happens at capital. I mean, that's a long struggle. It's the right struggle, but you have to recognize.
But if you had a president in there, he would have, or she would have, airtime. Number one, and plus, I'm saying when I say Occupy elections, I mean what I've been saying all along. I've interviewed congressional candidates and the Senate candidates as well, because I mean that's both houses of Congress. You really need to have some people there who are standing for us, who aren't bought. I mean, wasn't Hume right that nothing appears more surprising to those who consider human affairs with a philosophical eye than the easiness with which the many are governed by the few. We still outnumber them. I think with effort, if we recruit enough effort, and if we could get this...
It should certainly be tried, but we shouldn't underestimate the scale and character of what has to be done. It's a long, hard struggle. It's putting somebody in office, even if you could do it, which you can't, wouldn't change anything.
Well, unless we got people in those other offices too.
Yeah, but that's a big job, and it should be done. Actually, that's one thing the right wing understood. They began their organizing with school boards, local representatives, and so on. And yeah, that's the way to build up an electoral movement.
Well, let's hope things cook in the next year. I think we're out of time.
Yeah.
Thanks again. Let's hope